Pompeii. Today it stands as a haunting tableau, an ancient city caught in the grip of death, eerily preserved beneath a blanket of volcanic ash. Streets where children once played lie silent. Homes, once full of life, remain abandoned mid-moment, bowls still on tables, bodies curled in their final breath. But before it was a symbol of sudden catastrophe, Pompeii was a city of splendor, bustling, vibrant, alive. Nestled in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius on Italy's western coast, Pompeii flourished as a Roman resort town. Merchants, aristocrats, and farmers coexisted in this Mediterranean jewel. Cobblestone roads echoed with footsteps, markets brimmed with wine, olives, and exotic spices, and public baths echoed with laughter. Life here was good. And yet, unbeknownst to its people, their paradise stood on the edge of a ticking time bomb. Mount Vesuvius loomed in the background, towering, quiet, dormant. But it was never truly asleep. For centuries, it watched in silence as generations built their lives along its slopes. It gave fertile soil and fair weather. It demanded nothing in return, until it did. In the year 79 AD, the mountain awakened with a fury unlike anything the Roman world had ever seen. The eruption would last nearly 24 hours. But in that single day, Pompeii and nearby Herculaneum would vanish from the face of the earth, forgotten, buried, lost. And for 1,700 years, they remained hidden beneath layers of ash and time. Until one day, centuries later, explorers began to uncover a ghost town, perfectly preserved, almost as if time itself had stopped. The story of Pompeii is not just a tale of destruction. It is a window into the ancient world, a moment in time frozen in volcanic stone. A tragedy, yes, but also a gift to history. A city silenced in an instant, yet louder than ever in its stillness. This is the story of Pompeii, how it lived, how it died, and how it was found again. Long before ash fell from the sky, Pompeii was a city of light. Founded in the 7th century BC by the Oscans, an ancient Italic people, Pompeii began as a small settlement perched along the Sarno River. Its strategic location near the Bay of Naples and the crossroads of vital trade routes made it a prime target for conquest, and it wasn't long before more powerful empires took notice. First came the Etruscans, then the Greeks, and finally the Romans. By the 1st century AD, Pompeii had fully embraced Roman culture, governance, and architecture. It transformed into a thriving provincial town with nearly 12,000 residents. And though not as grand as Rome itself, Pompeii was a miniature reflection of the empire's opulence and order. The city was alive with color. Walls were painted with frescoes, mythological scenes, gardens, banquets, and erotic imagery. Mosaics glistened in private homes, some proudly warning intruders. Cave Canem, beware of the dog. Pompeii was a melting pot. Merchants rubbed shoulders with slaves. Politicians debated in the forum while bakers fired their ovens just down the street. The elite held lavish feasts in open-air courtyards, while farmers toiled in fertile fields fed by the volcanic soil of Vesuvius, a cruel irony in hindsight. There were amphitheaters for gladiatorial combat, public baths heated by Roman engineering, and brothels frequented without shame. Life in Pompeii was sensuous, social, and deeply connected to the natural world, sun, sea, and soil. Religion permeated everything. Shrines to household gods, Lares and Penates, stood in corners of homes. Temples to Jupiter, Apollo, and Venus dominated public spaces. But there was no temple to Vesuvius. Perhaps they didn't think it needed one, or perhaps they simply didn't fear it. The people of Pompeii lived as though tomorrow was certain. Their calendars were filled with festivals and games. Their streets buzzed with commerce and gossip. They built fountains, aqueducts, and villas that overlooked the bay. They carved their lives into stone and left traces of joy, vanity, and vice. And all the while, the mountain watched. The rise of Pompeii was marked by prosperity, but also by ignorance. Vesuvius had been quiet for centuries. Too quiet. Its last major eruption, long before recorded history, had been forgotten. Even Pliny the Elder, one of the greatest Roman naturalists, believed it to be just a mountain, picturesque, harmless. But beneath that calm exterior, magma was rising. Pressure was building. The earth was whispering warnings. And soon it would scream. The earth speaks, always, but not everyone knows how or when to listen. In the years leading up to the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, the land around Pompeii had begun to change. Subtle, strange. yet few took notice. It began with tremors. Small earthquakes rattled the ground, barely enough to crack a wall or spill a jar. In 62 AD, a particularly strong quake struck the region. Buildings crumbled. Temples were damaged. The city's great amphitheater suffered serious structural harm. Panic rippled through Pompeii, but only for a moment. To the people, this was a nuisance, not a prophecy. Earthquakes were common in Italy, just another part of life in a seismically active land. The gods were displeased, some said. Others chalked it up to fate. They rebuilt, repainted, resumed. But the signs did not stop. Over the next 17 years, the tremors returned, frequent and unsettling. Wells ran dry. Animals became restless. The Sarno River shifted its course slightly. Springs near the mountain disappeared entirely. Still, no one made the connection. Science as we know it did not yet exist. Volcanology was centuries away. Even Pliny the Elder, learned, observant, and curious, failed to see Vesuvius for what it truly was. A volcano, a killer cloaked in stone. To the Romans, mountains were majestic, eternal. Their power lay in their size, not their fury. The word volcano itself hadn't even been coined. There was no language for what was coming. Then, in the days before the eruption, the mountain began to groan louder. Animals fled the forests. Birds vanished from the sky. Water in wells turned sulfurous. Some citizens reported seeing strange clouds near the summit, dark, serpentine, unnatural. The ground trembled more violently now, shaking the foundations of temples and homes. But by then it was too late. On the morning of August 24, 79 AD, the mountain split open. What followed would become one of the most catastrophic natural disasters in recorded history. An eruption so violent it would wipe entire cities off the map and burn their names into legend. And most chilling of all, the people of Pompeii had no idea what was about to happen. They had been warned, but they did not understand the language. Dawn broke over Pompeii on August 24, 79 AD, like any other summer morning. The sun rose warm over the Bay of Naples. Merchants opened their stalls. Children laughed in the streets. Bakers stoked their ovens. And far in the distance, Mount Vesuvius stood still, silent, brooding. But at 10 a.m., everything changed. Without warning, the mountain erupted. A deafening explosion shattered the calm. The summit split apart as a column of ash, gas, and rock shot into the sky, soaring over 20 kilometers high. Witnesses would later describe it as a pine tree, thick at the base, then branching out in an ominous cloud. The people of Pompeii had never seen anything like it. How could they? There were no words, no stories, no warnings passed down through generations, just panic. The ground shook violently, roofs collapsed, buildings cracked, and then the ash began to fall. At first it came like fine snow, gray, soft, silent. It dusted rooftops and streets. People paused, confused, afraid. Some stared at the mountain in awe. Others rushed to gather family, to find shelter, to flee. By midday, the ash thickened. Darkness began to spread. The sky turned a sickly yellow, then gray, then black. Night fell in the middle of the day. The air grew heavy, choking. Breathing became difficult. Sulfur burned the lungs. Ash blanketed everything, rising ankle-deep, then knee-deep. Homes caved in beneath its weight. Streets became impassable. Those who fled found the roads blocked or buried. Those who stayed hoped it would pass. But the mountain was only getting started. By afternoon, Vesuvius was raining rock. Pumice stones, some the size of fists, fell from the sky. They shattered windows, crushed skulls, pierced flesh. Roofs collapsed beneath their weight. Panic turned to chaos. And still the people had no clear idea of what they were facing. Some took shelter in cellars, thinking they'd ride it out underground. Others climbed to higher ground, desperate to escape the rising ash. Some simply froze, paralyzed by fear, clinging to family, praying to gods who would not answer. Then, just after midnight, nearly 12 hours after the eruption began, the true horror arrived. A pyroclastic surge. A wall of superheated gas, ash, and rock rushed down the mountain at speeds over 100 kilometers per hour. Temperatures soared to nearly 300 degrees C, hot enough to vaporize flesh in an instant. There was no warning, no time to run. In an instant, Pompeii was smothered. Those in its path died where they stood, muscles seized, lungs scorched, lives ended mid-motion. The second surge followed minutes later, then a third, a fourth. The mountain unleashed everything it had. By dawn, the city was gone. Buried beneath 6 meters of ash and debris, Pompeii disappeared from the map. The sea had retreated. The rivers had changed. And where life once thrived, there was now only silence. The day the sky turned black was the last day of Pompeii. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius was not just an act of nature, it was a massacre. When the pyroclastic surges swept through Pompeii, death was immediate and absolute. There was no escape, no last words, no time for farewell, just silence and then ash. For centuries, the world would know little of the human cost. But when excavations began in the 18th century, what they found beneath the hardened layers of volcanic stone was more than ruins. They found people, bodies perfectly preserved in their final moments, not as skeletons but as hollow voids in the ash, spaces where human flesh once was. Archaeologists, realizing the delicate outlines left by decayed bodies, began to fill them with plaster. What emerged were ghostly sculptures of real Pompeians, frozen in time. A man shielding his face. A mother cradling her child. A dog twisted in agony, chained near a doorway. A young girl curled into herself, as if sleep could protect her. These were not statues, they were people, caught not just in death but in the sheer terror of it, expressions etched in ash, lives interrupted without mercy. Most died from thermal shock, instantly incinerated by the surging cloud of heat. Their muscles contracted, their bones cracked, some never even had time to move. Others suffocated slowly, buried in the ash as roofs collapsed around them, lungs filled with fine particles, breath growing shallow, then still. There were moments of heartbreaking humanity. Near the city gates, a family of 5 huddled together in a final embrace. In the Villa of the Mysteries, the remains of a young woman were found beside her jewelry box, adorned in gold bracelets, as if she hoped to save the things she cherished most. Some tried to flee by sea. In nearby Stabii, the famed Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder lost his life while attempting to rescue survivors. Overwhelmed by gas and ash, he collapsed on the shoreline, his curiosity and courage marking his final moments. In total, it is estimated that over 2,000 people died in Pompeii alone. More perished in surrounding towns, Herculaneum, Oplontes, Stabii, each consumed by the fury of the mountain. But the true toll goes beyond numbers. These were families, lovers, children, workers. Their deaths were not just tragic, they were intimate, preserved with a clarity that time should never allow. And perhaps that is what makes Pompeii's story so haunting. Not that they died, but that we can still see how they died. The ash preserved not just bodies, but emotions, panic, fear, helplessness, and in some rare cases, love. Ashes and agony. That is Pompeii's legacy, not just the loss of a city, but the raw, human truth of what it means to face the end. Pompeii was not the only city to fall. To the west of Mount Vesuvius, nestled closer to the mountain's base and the Bay of Naples, lay Herculaneum, smaller, wealthier, and for many years forgot. Unlike Pompeii, which was smothered primarily by falling ash and pumice, Herculaneum met a different fate, one far more sudden, far more violent. When Vesuvius erupted, the prevailing winds initially spared Herculaneum. While ash rained down on Pompeii, life in Herculaneum continued, briefly. Residents watched the sky darken. They saw the distant column of smoke, heard the distant thunder of the mountain cracking open. But without ash falling on their city, many believed they were safe. They were not. Late into the night, as Pompeii choked under layers of ash, a surge of pyroclastic fury raced down Vesuvius's western flank. It reached Herculaneum without warning, a superheated avalanche of gas and volcanic debris, over 400 degrees C in temperature, moving at hurricane speed. It vaporized everything in its path. Wood, flesh, fabric all gone in an instant. Unlike Pompeii, where some bodies remained intact, most of Herculaneum's victims simply ceased to exist.